Please, save Jimin. I don't care what it costs. Just don't let him die. Jungkook's voice shattered the silence of the emergency room with such unbearable desperation that every nurse, doctor, and patient instinctively stopped moving. The sharp rhythm of hurried footsteps faded beneath the relentless scream of heart monitors. For one impossible second, the entire hospital seemed to forget how to breathe. The automatic doors burst open behind him as the emergency team rushed a blood-soaked stretcher through the brightly lit corridor. Rainwater dripped from Jungkook's trembling jacket, mixing with crimson stains that covered both of his shaking hands. His fingers refused to let go of Jimin's cold wrist, even as medical staff gently tried to separate them. "So please step back, I won't leave him." His voice cracked so violently that even the veteran surgeon standing nearby hesitated before speaking. Jimin's face was unnaturally pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Tiny cuts lined his forehead, and strands of silver-blonde hair clung to his skin. His chest rose only slightly beneath the oxygen mask, while crimson soaked the white sheets wrapped around him. The scent of antiseptic mixed with fresh rain and iron-like blood, creating an atmosphere so heavy that everyone inside the emergency unit could almost taste fear itself. Only 20 minutes earlier, everything had been ordinary. Jimin had insisted on stopping at a small convenience store after finishing a late-night charity rehearsal. He wanted to buy warm coffee because Jungkook had quietly admitted he was exhausted. Such a simple gesture, something Jimin always did without expecting gratitude. That was who he had always been, kind, quiet, the kind of person who remembered everyone's favorite drink but often forgot to care for himself. Jungkook could still hear Jimin laughing beneath the rain as they crossed the empty intersection. "You look sleepy," Jimin had teased. "I'm fine, you're lying." "I'm not. You blink slower when you're tired." Jungkook had laughed. "You notice everything." Jimin only smiled. "Notice you." Those three words echoed endlessly inside Jungkook's mind, now like fragments of a dream already disappearing. Then came the blinding headlights, the deafening horn, the violent sound of twisting metal. Everything after that existed only in broken flashes. Jimin shoving Jungkook backward with surprising strength. A violent impact. Rain exploding across the asphalt. Someone screaming. Jungkook never remembered falling. He only remembered opening his eyes to find Jimin lying several meters away, perfectly still beneath the pouring rain. For a terrifying heartbeat, the world became completely silent. No thunder, no traffic, no voices, only emptiness. He had crawled across the wet road, ignoring the pain burning through his own bruised shoulder. "Jimin," there was no answer. His hands shook uncontrollably as he lifted Jimin's head, warm blood soaked through his sleeves. "No, no, stay with me." A faint breath escaped Jimin's lips, barely enough to prove he was still alive. That single breath became Jungkook's entire universe. The ambulance had arrived within minutes, yet every second afterward felt endless. Now those endless seconds had led here, the operating room. The bright red warning light above the automatic doors flickered on. A nurse finally managed to pull Jungkook away. "You have to let them work." Jungkook's knees gave out beneath him. He collapsed against the cold hospital wall, staring blankly at the closed operating room doors. The polished floor reflected distorted images of white coats moving hurriedly in every direction. Conversations became muffled echoes. Machines beeped somewhere beyond the walls. The hospital continued functioning, but Jungkook's world had stopped. His hands remained frozen in front of him, still stained with Jimin's blood. He rubbed them together desperately. Again, again, again. The blood wouldn't disappear. A nurse quietly approached carrying a warm towel. "You should clean your hands." Jungkook looked down without moving. "If I wash them." His voice was barely audible. "It'll feel like I'm letting him go." Nurse lowered her eyes, unable to answer. Nearby, an elderly patient watching from a wheelchair slowly wiped tears from his own face. No one inside the corridor had known Jimin personally. Yet somehow everyone understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't simply fear, it was love refusing to surrender. Hours crawled by beneath the relentless ticking of the large wall clock. Outside, the storm continued pounding against the hospital windows. Lightning illuminated the empty parking lot in brilliant flashes before darkness swallowed everything again. Jungkook remained exactly where he had collapsed. He refused food, ignored water, didn't look at his phone. Every sound from behind the operating room doors made his heart race. Every silence terrified him even more. His thoughts wandered back through years of memories. Jimin laughing with ice cream on his nose. Jimin quietly placing an umbrella over him during unexpected rain. Jimin pretending not to notice whenever Jungkook secretly struggled. There had always been something extraordinary about him. He healed people without realizing it, not through medicine, but through kindness. Jungkook suddenly remembered something from years earlier. They had been sitting beside a quiet river after sunset. Jimin had skipped a stone across the water. "If one day something bad happens to me," Jungkook interrupted immediately. "It won't." Jimin smiled gently. "Just promise me you'll keep smiling." "I hate promises like that." "I know, so stop saying things that scare me." Jimin laughed softly. "You worry too much." Now Jungkook buried his face in both trembling hands. "I should have worried even more." His whispered confession disappeared beneath another distant roll of thunder. The operating room doors finally opened. Every doctor stepped outside wearing expressions impossible to read. Jungkook stood so quickly that the chair behind him crashed onto the floor. His heartbeat pounded louder than every sound surrounding him. The lead surgeon removed his surgical mask slowly before meeting Jungkook's terrified eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence itself felt heavier than words. Then the surgeon finally inhaled. "We've done everything we possibly can." Jungkook felt his entire body become weightless. The corridor blurred, his breathing stopped. The world narrowed to that single sentence. And all he could do was stand there, praying that fate would still show mercy to the person who had always spent his life protecting everyone else. The first thing Jungkook noticed was not the surgeon's voice, it was the silence. The kind of silence that swallowed every heartbeat, every whispered prayer, every distant footstep until nothing remained except the terrifying sound of his own breathing. Then the surgeon finally spoke again. Jimin survived the operation. Jungkook's knees nearly buckled beneath him. A breath he didn't realize he had been holding escaped in a broken sob. Tears streamed freely down his face before he could stop them. For the first time in hours, hope slipped through the suffocating darkness. But that single word froze the warmth inside his chest. He lost a great deal of blood. The surgeon continued gently. The injuries to his chest and head were severe. We managed to stop the bleeding, but the next 24 hours will determine whether his body can recover. Jungkook nodded repeatedly, barely hearing the explanation. "Can I see him?" The surgeon hesitated, only for a minute. The intensive care unit felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Every machine emitted its own rhythm, creating a strange orchestra of mechanical life. White curtains swayed slightly beneath the cool air from the ventilation system. The scent of disinfectant lingered in every corner. Jimin lay perfectly still beneath a thin blanket. His face looked almost peaceful despite the bruises spreading across his temple. A ventilator breathed for him with quiet precision, while countless wires disappeared beneath the blanket covering his fragile body. Jungkook stopped at the doorway. For a moment, he couldn't move. This didn't look like the Jimin he knew. The Jimin he remembered never stayed still. He laughed while walking. He hummed songs without realizing it. He smiled even when he was exhausted. Now the room was filled only with the steady beeping of a heart monitor. Jungkook slowly approached the bed. His trembling fingers reached for Jimin's hand. It was warm, not cold anymore, a tiny miracle. "I'm here," Jungkook whispered. "You promised we'd watch the sunrise tomorrow." His voice cracked. "You don't get to break promises." Only answer was the quiet hiss of the ventilator. Jungkook smiled through his tears anyway. "You always scold me for skipping meals." His thumb gently brushed across Jimin's fingers. "So, when you wake up, you can yell at me again." His laughter dissolved into another sob. "Listen this time." Outside the room, a nurse silently closed the door halfway, giving him a little privacy. No one interrupted. Everyone understood that some conversations were too sacred for witnesses. Hours passed. Morning slowly replaced the storm. Golden sunlight slipped through the hospital windows, painting soft lines across the polished floor. Visitors filled the corridors. Doctors exchanged reports. Life continued moving. Jungkook never left the chair beside Jimin's bed. Whenever exhaustion forced his eyes closed, he woke within minutes, afraid something might happen while he slept. He counted every heartbeat displayed on the monitor. Every rise of Jimin's chest became another reason to keep believing. Late that afternoon, an elderly woman entered the room carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. She smiled kindly. "Been volunteering here for 20 years. Jungkook stood politely. "I heard about your friend." She placed the flowers on the windowsill. "Sometimes people hear more than we think." Jungkook looked toward Jimin. "You mean, seen patients wake up because they recognized a familiar voice." She gently adjusted one flower, "So keep talking." Before leaving, she smiled once more. "Hope is stronger than medicine believes." After she disappeared into the hallway, Jungkook returned to his chair. He began telling stories about the first time they met. About embarrassing moments Jimin always tried to hide, about late-night walks, about coffee dates, about dreams they had never finished discussing. His voice filled the quiet room hour after hour. As evening approached, the sky outside turned shades of orange and violet. The setting sun reflected softly across the hospital windows. Jungkook leaned closer. "You know," he smiled faintly. "Never thanked you." His fingers tightened gently around Jimin's hand. "Spent years protecting me." His eyes glistened. "But I never asked who was protecting you." A single tear slipped onto the blanket. "I'm sorry." Room remained silent until beep, 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 the heart monitor suddenly changed rhythm. Jungkook looked up immediately. His heartbeat raced. The machine continued its steady sound. Then, a finger twitched, barely, so small that he wondered if exhaustion had created the illusion. He held his breath. Another tiny movement, this time unmistakable. His voice echoed through the ICU within seconds. Nurses and physicians rushed into the room. They quickly examined Jimin's pupils, checked the monitors, and exchanged hopeful glances. One nurse smiled. "He's responding." Jungkook stepped back, unable to stop crying. He covered his mouth with both hands as relief overwhelmed him. The doctor adjusted the monitors before looking toward Jungkook. "This is a very encouraging sign." Jungkook nodded over and over. "Will he wake up? We believe he's trying." Those words echoed inside Jungkook long after the medical team finished their examination. Trying, it sounded so much like Jimin, even unconscious. He was still fighting. Jungkook returned to the bedside and gently squeezed Jimin's hand. I knew you wouldn't give up. Outside the window, the last light of day disappeared beyond the horizon. Inside the quiet hospital room, surrounded by soft machine rhythms and fading sunlight, hope finally felt real. For the first time since the terrible accident, Jungkook allowed himself to believe that tomorrow might not begin with fear, but with another chance. Morning arrived quietly, washing the hospital room in a pale golden light that softened the cold white walls. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor no longer sounded like a warning to Jungkook. Instead, each gentle beat felt like a promise that Jimin was still fighting. Jungkook had not slept. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his shoulders ached from spending the entire night leaning against the edge of the hospital bed. Even so, he never once considered leaving. Every few minutes, he glanced at Jimin's face, searching for the smallest sign that he was returning. The room remained still until Jimin's eyelashes fluttered. At first, the movement was so faint that Jungkook wondered if exhaustion was playing tricks on him. Then it happened again. Jungkook immediately stood. Jimin. His voice barely escaped as a whisper. Slowly, painfully, Jimin's eyes opened. The bright light forced him to blink several times before his gaze wandered across the unfamiliar ceiling. Confusion clouded his expression. He tried to move but winced almost instantly as pain spread through his chest. Don't move, Jungkook said softly, rushing closer. You're safe. Jimin turned his head with obvious effort. For several silent seconds, he simply stared at Jungkook. Then, with dry lips barely able to form words, he whispered, You're okay. Jungkook froze. Those were Jimin's first words. Not where am I, not what happened. Only a question about him. Tears filled Jungkook's eyes once again. I'm fine, he answered quickly. Because of you. A faint smile appeared on Jimin's pale face before exhaustion closed his eyes again. The doctors entered moments later after hearing the monitors indicate increased activity. They carefully examined Jimin, checking his breathing, his pupils, and his responses. He'll need plenty of rest, the lead physician explained. His body has survived something extraordinary, but recovery will take time. Jungkook nodded gratefully. As the medical team left, silence returned to the room. Outside, sunlight reflected against the hospital windows while birds sang somewhere beyond the parking lot. It was difficult to believe that only 2 days earlier, the same sky had unleashed a violent storm. Jungkook pulled a chair closer. You scared me. Jimin looked toward him with tired eyes. I'm sorry. No. Jungkook gently shook his head. You don't get to apologize. Jimin looked confused. You pushed me out of the way. You would have done the same. I wasn't fast enough. You were. Jimin's voice was weak but certain. You lived. Jungkook lowered his head, unable to hide the tears gathering again. Almost lost you. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Sometimes silence carried emotions that words could never hold. Later that afternoon, a police officer arrived to ask a few questions about the accident. He explained that the driver responsible had lost control during the heavy rain and had remained at the scene, calling for help immediately. Investigations suggested it had been a tragic accident rather than an intentional act. Jungkook listened quietly. Anger had consumed him during the first hours after the accident. Now it had faded. Nothing could change what had happened. The only thing that mattered was helping Jimin heal. Days slowly passed. The tubes disappeared one by one. The oxygen mask was removed. Jimin gradually learned to sit upright again despite the pain that tightened across his ribs. Physical therapy became part of each morning. Every small achievement felt enormous. The first time Jimin stood for 10 seconds without assistance, the nurses applauded. The first time he walked 5 careful steps down the hallway. Jungkook smiled so brightly that even strangers couldn't help smiling with him. Recovery was slow, some nights were difficult. Pain often woke Jimin before dawn. Sometimes memories of the accident returned as vivid nightmares. Whenever that happened, Jungkook was already there. He never asked questions. He simply sat beside the bed until Jimin fell asleep again. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky shades of orange and pink, they stood together beside the hospital window. I remember everything, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook looked at him. Headlights, the rain, calling my name. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon. I thought I wasn't going to see another sunrise. Jungkook swallowed hard. But you did, Jimin smiled faintly, because I still had someone waiting for me. Room fell silent again. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware that inside one hospital room, 2 lives had been forever changed. Jungkook gently placed his hand over Jimin's. You don't have to protect me anymore. Jimin looked surprised. We'll protect each other. The first time since the accident, Jimin's smile reached his eyes. It wasn't a large smile. It wasn't perfect, but it carried something far stronger than relief. It carried hope. And as the evening light slowly faded into the quiet blue of night, both of them understood that surviving the accident had not simply given them another chance to live. It had given them another chance to cherish every ordinary moment they had almost lost forever.
The morning Jimin was finally allowed to leave his hospital room. The corridor felt strangely quieter than it had on the night he arrived. Nurses who had cared for him for weeks paused to wave goodbye. and even doctors who rarely showed emotion smiled as he slowly walked toward the elevator with careful, measured steps. Jungkook stayed close beside him without saying a word. He noticed every slight hesitation in Jimin's stride, every instinctive hand pressed against his healing ribs, every brief pause to catch his breath. Jimin still insisted he was fine, but Jungkook had learned that those words often hid pain rather than comfort. Outside the hospital, the air smelled different, fresh, warm, alive. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the small garden near the entrance. Cars moved calmly through the streets, and people laughed as they passed by, completely unaware of how precious an ordinary morning could become. Jimin closed his eyes for a moment and inhaled deeply. "I missed this." "The fresh air?" Jungkook asked. Jimin smiled softly. "No." He opened his eyes and looked at the sky. "I missed feeling like tomorrow actually exists." Jungkook looked at him quietly before helping him into the passenger seat of the car. The drive home was peaceful. Neither of them played music. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt comfortable, filled with everything they didn't need to say aloud. Rain clouds still floated in the distance, but sunlight continued breaking through them, painting the city in soft shades of gold. When they finally reached home, Jimin stood motionless at the front door. His hand rested lightly on the familiar handle. "It feels strange," he admitted. "What does?" "I left this house thinking I'd come back after rehearsal." His smile faded slightly. "Never imagined I'd return after almost dying." Jungkook placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "But you came back." Jimin nodded. "Yeah." He stepped inside. Everything looked exactly as they had left it. A pair of shoes near the entrance, a forgotten coffee mug on the dining table, books stacked neatly beside the sofa. The ordinary details felt extraordinary now. Jimin slowly walked through the living room, touching the back of a chair, the edge of a bookshelf, the window curtain gently moving in the breeze. He whispered. That evening, Jungkook prepared dinner. It wasn't perfect. The rice was slightly overcooked and the soup needed more seasoning. Jimin laughed after the first spoonful. "You definitely didn't inherit anyone's cooking skills." Jungkook pretended to look offended. "I spent an hour making that." "Can tell." "So, is it terrible?" Jimin smiled. "It's the best meal I've had." Jungkook laughed. "Lying. I am." They both burst into laughter, the sound filling the house for the first time in weeks. The laughter eventually faded into comfortable silence. Jimin looked around the room. "Almost forgot what happiness sounds like." Jungkook lowered his chopsticks. "You never have to forget again." That night, sleep came more easily. The nightmares were still there, waiting somewhere beyond dreams, but they no longer felt impossible to face. Just before midnight, rain began tapping softly against the windows. Jimin opened his eyes. For a brief second, panic flashed across his face as memories of the accident threatened to return. Before fear could fully take hold, he noticed a warm light beneath the bedroom door. He quietly stepped into the hallway. Jungkook was sitting on the living room sofa, unable to sleep, reading a worn notebook. "You couldn't sleep either?" Jimin asked. Jungkook looked up and smiled. "I was worried the rain might bother you." Jimin sat beside him. It did. Several moments they simply listened to the gentle rainfall. Unlike the violent storm that had changed their lives, tonight's rain sounded peaceful, almost comforting. Jungkook opened the notebook. "I found something." Inside were old photographs tucked between the pages, pictures from years earlier, a camping trip, a birthday celebration, a rainy afternoon where both of them stood beneath a single umbrella, laughing so hard the photograph had captured neither of them looking at the camera. "I remember this," Jimin said. "You insisted on walking home in the rain. You complained the entire time." "I did." "You never let go of the umbrella." Jungkook smiled. "I guess I was afraid you'd catch a cold." Jimin looked at the photograph for a long time, then he quietly said, "You know, I spent so much time trying to protect everyone around me that I forgot it was okay to let someone protect me too." Jungkook gently closed the notebook. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." Jimin nodded slowly. "I know." Outside, the rain gradually stopped. Moonlight slipped through the clouds, illuminating the quiet neighborhood. The world seemed almost unchanged from before the accident, yet both of them knew they had changed forever. Not because of the pain they had endured, not because of the scars that would remain, but because they had discovered something far stronger than fear. Life was fragile, time was unpredictable, and every ordinary day shared with someone who truly cared was a gift too precious to postpone. As dawn slowly approached, neither of them felt the need to speak again. The silence between them was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was filled with gratitude for another sunrise, for another chance, for another tomorrow they could finally face together. Several weeks later, the scars had begun to fade, but they had not disappeared. Every morning, sunlight spilled through the living room windows, warming the quiet house before either of them woke. It had become a small ritual for Jungkook to prepare breakfast while Jimin slowly completed the stretching exercises his physical therapist had taught him. The movements were careful, almost cautious, but each day he could lift his arms a little higher and breathe a little deeper without wincing. "You've improved," Jungkook said as he placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. Jimin smiled while lowering his arms. "I still can't beat you in a race." "You couldn't before the accident either," Jimin laughed. "That's true." Laughter lingered between them, light and genuine, until the ringing of a phone interrupted the peaceful morning. Jungkook answered. His expression gradually became serious. After hanging up, he remained silent for several seconds. "What happened?" Jimin asked. "Hospital called." Jimin's smile faded. "Is everything okay? They're holding a small appreciation ceremony today." "What?" the doctors said. "They wanted to thank everyone involved in your recovery." Jimin looked surprised. "Me," Jungkook nodded. "They also asked if we'd be willing to meet the emergency team." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Returning to the hospital meant returning to the place where fear had nearly consumed them both. Still, Jimin slowly nodded. "I think it's time." That afternoon, they walked through the same entrance where weeks earlier Jungkook had carried unbearable despair in his heart. Everything looked familiar: the polished floor, the reception desk, the scent of disinfectant. Yet the atmosphere felt completely different. This time, no one was running. No alarms echoed through the corridors. Instead, nurses smiled warmly as they recognized Jimin. One of them approached immediately. "You look so much healthier." "Thanks to all of you," Jimin replied with a grateful bow. The ceremony itself was simple. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, and several volunteers gathered in a quiet conference room. The lead surgeon stepped forward first. "In medicine," he began, "we often remember the difficult nights, but sometimes we are fortunate enough to witness hope become stronger than fear." His eyes settled on Jimin. "You reminded every member of our team why we chose this profession." Room filled with gentle applause. Jimin lowered his head, visibly embarrassed. "I should be the one thanking you," surgeon smiled. "We all did our jobs." Jimin glanced toward Jungkook. "He did much more than that." Everyone turned toward Jungkook. "He never left," one nurse said softly. "He stayed here every single day," another added. "He talked to you even when you couldn't answer," said an elderly volunteer. Jimin looked at Jungkook with surprise. "You never told me." Jungkook shrugged shyly. "It didn't seem important." "It was." Jimin's voice trembled. "It was everything." After the gathering ended, many of the staff returned to their duties. The hospital continued its quiet rhythm, welcoming new patients and new families carrying hopes of their own. Before leaving, Jungkook and Jimin stopped outside the intensive care unit. The hallway looked exactly as it had on that unforgettable night. Jungkook stood still. "I hated this place." Jimin gently looked at him. "I know. I thought it was where I'd lose you." Jimin rested a hand on his shoulder. "But instead..." Jungkook looked around the corridor. "It's where I realized how much you mean to me." Words hung softly in the air. Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he smiled with quiet warmth. "I already knew." Jungkook blinked. "You did," Jimin laughed gently. "Never been very good at hiding your feelings." Both of them laughed together as they walked toward the hospital exit. Outside, the afternoon sky stretched endlessly above them, bright blue without a single storm cloud. Children chased pigeons across the courtyard while families sat beneath flowering trees. Life continued moving forward. As they reached the small garden near the entrance, they noticed the elderly volunteer who had once placed white lilies in Jimin's hospital room. She was carefully watering the flowers. When she saw them, her face lit up. "I knew you'd both come back one day." Jimin bowed respectfully. "Thank you," she smiled. "What?" "For reminding him to keep talking." She looked toward Jungkook. "Only gave a little advice." Jungkook shook his head. "It gave me hope when I had almost none left." The elderly woman looked at the blooming lilies before speaking. "Hope grows quietly." She touched one white blossom. "It doesn't erase painful memories. It simply teaches us that light can still exist beside them." Neither Jungkook nor Jimin replied. They didn't need to together. They stood beneath the warm afternoon sun, watching the flowers sway gently in the breeze. The memories of that terrible night would never completely disappear. The scars would always remain. But they no longer represented only pain. They had become reminders of survival, compassion, and the extraordinary strength that love and unwavering devotion could awaken in the darkest moments. As they walked away from the hospital side by side, neither of them looked back. For the first time since everything had changed, the future no longer felt uncertain. It felt like a quiet road stretching toward countless ordinary days they would never again take for granted, and days they would cherish together with grateful hearts. Autumn arrived almost unnoticed. The leaves lining the streets turned shades of amber and crimson, drifting gently onto sidewalks where strangers hurried through their ordinary routines. The city had long since forgotten the terrible accident that had once filled the evening news for a single day before disappearing beneath newer headlines. Jimin and Jungkook had not forgotten. Some memories never asked for permission before returning. On quiet mornings, Jimin would unconsciously touch the faint scar beneath his collarbone while staring out the kitchen window. He rarely noticed he was doing it until Jungkook quietly slid a warm mug of coffee into his hands. Been thinking again. Jimin smiled sheepishly. It that obvious? You've been holding the same cup for 5 minutes. Jimin laughed. I guess old habits don't disappear easily. They don't have to. Jungkook sat across from him. We just learn how to live with them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was peaceful now, no longer haunted by fear. Later that afternoon, they decided to take a walk through the park where they had often gone before the accident. Children chased colorful kites across the open field while elderly couples strolled beneath towering trees. A street musician played a gentle melody on an acoustic guitar, and the crisp autumn breeze carried the comforting aroma of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. Jimin slowed his pace as they reached a wooden bridge overlooking a quiet lake. The water reflected the golden leaves like scattered pieces of sunlight. I used to think surviving was the end of the story, Jimin said softly. Jungkook looked at him. And now, I think surviving is only the beginning. Jungkook smiled. Like that. Jimin leaned against the wooden railing. When I was lying in that hospital bed, I kept wondering why I had been given another chance. Have you found the answer? Jimin looked toward the rippling water. Completely. He smiled gently. But maybe I don't need to. Breeze stirred the fallen leaves around their feet. A little girl suddenly ran toward the bridge, chasing a bright red balloon that had slipped from her hand. Oh no! The balloon drifted higher with every gust of wind. Without thinking, Jimin hurried forward and caught the string just before it floated beyond reach. The little girl stopped in front of him, breathing heavily. My balloon. Jimin knelt carefully, ignoring the slight ache in his ribs, and handed it back. There you go. Her eyes sparkled. Thank you. She hugged the balloon tightly before running back to her parents. Her mother bowed gratefully from a distance. As they disappeared into the crowd, Jungkook smiled. You still can't ignore someone who needs help. Jimin chuckled. I don't think I ever will. I'm glad. They continued walking until sunset painted the lake with brilliant shades of orange and gold. The city lights gradually flickered to life around them. It feels strange, Jungkook admitted. What does? A few months ago, I thought I'd never get to see another sunset with you. Jimin turned toward him. And yet here we are. Jungkook nodded. Here we are. Several minutes, they simply stood together, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear beyond the horizon. The moment was wonderfully ordinary. No emergency alarms, no rushing footsteps, no desperate prayers. Only the quiet rhythm of the wind, the distant laughter of families, and two people who had learned the true value of simply being together. As darkness slowly settled over the park, Jimin took one final look at the glowing sky. I don't want to spend my life being afraid anymore. You don't have to. I know, he smiled, because every new day feels like a gift now. Jungkook looked at the path stretching ahead of them. Then let's make sure we never waste it. They walked home side by side beneath the first stars of the evening, their footsteps steady and unhurried. The scars they carried would always be part of them, quiet reminders of a night that had nearly stolen everything. Yet those same scars had also taught them to treasure the smallest moments. A shared breakfast, an afternoon walk, the laughter of strangers, the warmth of a familiar hand. Life had not become perfect. It had simply become precious. And sometimes that was more than enough.
Years passed quietly, not in dramatic leaps but in countless ordinary moments that slowly stitched two wounded hearts back together. The scar across Jimin's chest faded into a thin silver line, barely visible beneath the morning sunlight. Jungkook's nightmares became less frequent, replaced by peaceful dreams filled with laughter, shared meals, and long walks beneath open skis. Neither of them ever spoke of that terrible night as often as they once had. They no longer needed to. The memory had become part of them, not as a source of fear, but as a reminder that life could change in a single heartbeat, and that love revealed its greatest strength in the moments when hope seemed impossible. One spring morning, they returned to the hospital together. The same automatic doors opened before them. The same scent of antiseptic drifted through the corridors. The same waiting room stood quietly beneath the bright lights. Yet everything felt different. This time, they were not running. They were smiling. Many of the nurses recognized them immediately. Some laughed in surprise, while others warmly embraced Jimin, unable to hide their joy at seeing him healthy and full of life. The lead surgeon, now with a few more strands of gray hair, greeted them with the same calm smile that had once carried both fear and hope. "Both come a long way," he said. Jimin bowed respectfully. "We wouldn't be here without all of you." Surgeon shook his head. "We only treated your injuries." He glanced toward Jungkook. Rest was healed by something medicine can never prescribe. Jungkook looked at Jimin and smiled. "Someone once told me that hope grows quietly." The elderly volunteer who had placed the white lilies in Jimin's room stepped into the hallway, still carrying fresh flowers in her hands. Though the years had passed, her gentle smile remained unchanged. "And I see that hope was right." She handed one white lily to Jimin. "New beginnings." Jimin accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." Before leaving the hospital, they visited the small garden outside where the lilies bloomed every spring. The flowers swayed gently beneath a warm breeze, their white petals glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Jimin knelt carefully and planted the lily beside the others. "Want this place to remind people that miracles don't always happen overnight," he said softly. "Sometimes they happen one heartbeat, one kind word, and one faithful person at a time." Jungkook stood beside him, his eyes shining with quiet emotion. "And sometimes," he added, "saving someone isn't only the work of doctors." Jimin looked at him. "It's refusing to leave their side when they need you the most." They shared a gentle smile, one that carried years of pain, healing, gratitude, and unwavering trust. As they walked away from the hospital for the last time, neither of them looked back. There was nothing left to fear inside those walls, only memories. Ahead of them stretched a peaceful road lined with blooming trees, children laughing in the distance, and sunlight filtering through fresh green leaves. The future no longer felt uncertain. It felt welcoming. Hand in hand, they continued walking without hurry, grateful for every ordinary step they were able to take together. Some stories end with grand victories. Others end with impossible miracles. Their story ended with something far simpler, and perhaps far more beautiful: a second chance. A promise never to take another sunrise for granted, and the quiet certainty that no matter what tomorrow might bring, they would face it together. The hospital that had once echoed with Jungkook's desperate cry had become the place where hope refused to surrender. The tears shed that stormy night were not forgotten, but they no longer represented despair. They had become the first drops of a new beginning. And as the evening sun disappeared beyond the horizon, two hearts that had once stood on the edge of losing everything walked forward with peace at last. The end.